Hello, this is Andrew Duncan, an alumnus of Huntington High School Speech and Debate, and today I will be talking about Lincoln Douglas and value debate. So moving right into it, what is value debate? To begin, every debate has what is known as a weighing mechanism, which is simply the method by which the debate is judged. Public forum has net benefits or whoever does the most good. Congress is judged by presentation, and Lincoln Douglas is judged by values. What this means is whoever upholds the prevailing value in the debate best wins the round. At the beginning of a round, both the AF and neg sides will present a value and argue which ought to be used throughout the round. So what is a value? Values can be anything from simple moral stances to entire philosophies backed by centuries of human thought. Though generally you will want to lean towards the latter of that equation, because having philosophers can help convince the judge that your value is greater than your opponent's. Although there is also some merit to keeping the debate simple via a simple value. Now, some examples of different values include utilitarianism, which is the idea that actions are good if they benefit the most people. This is very similar to public forum's net benefits. Human rights, which can take on many different interpretations. However, most use Thomas Jefferson's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Moving on to equality, which is about as simple as it sounds, but can usually be divided into equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Finally is social contract theory, an unwritten agreement between a government and its citizens outlining the duty of government and the rights citizens give up to live under its rule. For sake of simplicity, I won't go into that one in detail here. However, I encourage you to do your research on it on your own. Now, these aren't every single value under the sun you'll see, but they are some common examples that you will see throughout a lot of rounds. Now that we know what values are and what value debate is, let's talk about choosing your value. You can bring almost any value to any round, but there are some things to consider when trying to find a good one. The first being ensuring that the value you bring to the debate is supported by your contentions. If your value is equality, make sure your contentions uphold it and bring equality. The second of these things is ground. Make sure that the opponent is able to win the debate via your value. Otherwise, it may be considered abusive and your judge will not go with it. For example, say you have a round in which the resolution is, quote, "The United States ought to respond to Russian advances in the Arctic." If the affirmation brings the value of, quote, "American sovereignty," end quote, then there is virtually no arguments the neg can make to fulfill that value. And in response, all the neg would have to say is, this value provides no ground to the neg side and therefore cannot be considered for today's debate. Finally, how does your value relate to the resolution? Let's go back to our Arctic example. You could bring the value of positive environmental change, relating it to the resolution because the Arctic can provide invaluable data on melting permafrost, as well as resources essential for green energy production. The topic very clearly relates to environmental change through the examples I just provided, and thus it is a valid value within the debate. Let's move on to arguing with your value. In LD, both sides of the debate will present a value. You will be expected to prove that your value is superior to your opponent's, usually via the last two criteria on the previous slide. As a reminder, those were ground and making sure it relates to the resolution. However, there are some other arguments you may see when it comes to arguing with values. First of all, someone may argue that their value, quote, encompasses their opponent's. What this means is that through fulfilling one value, another is fulfilled inherently, but not vice versa. For example, let's say that the affirmation brought the value of human rights to the debate, and the negation brings equality. Because human rights are usually universal and applied to everyone, the affirmation may argue that through fulfilling human rights and giving them to everyone, they give everyone equality as well. However, giving everyone equality does not give everyone human rights, therefore proving the affirmation's value as superior. Arguments like this can be accounted for in value selection by choosing a unique or hard to fulfill value. However, you may not always win the value debate. In cases like this, you should argue that you fulfill both your opponent's value as well as your own within the debate. The way you may do this varies from round to round. Moving on really quickly to value criterion. The value criterion is what you use to, quote, measure your value in the debate. In essence, it is another value that in fulfilling it will also lead to the fulfillment of your main value. When presenting your value criterion, make sure it relates to your main value. Furthermore, all of the limits to choosing your value generally apply here as well. I will show some examples of this in practice later on in the video. Finally, let us move on to contentions. Now, there's a reason that most of this presentation has been focusing on values, and that's because in Lincoln Douglas, your contentions mean nothing if they do not relate back to a value. Now that I've stressed that point enough, let's go into simple contention structure, which is generally pretty simple. Your contention presents a problem, it outlines the harms of that problem, it then goes on to solve that problem, and then outlines the benefits of doing so. Alright, now that you all know pretty much the basics of Lincoln Douglas debate, let's move on to a more relaxed part of the video, in which I'm just going to be going over an old case of mine and showing you what parts of that presentation apply to this case. So, as you can see, the resolution is the United States ought to prohibit the extraction of fossil fuels from federal public lands and waters, and this is an affirmation case. So in it, I present the value of quality of life, which is I give a definition according to a source, which is ensure the well-being of either population or individual, and then I justify it with this sentence here. Note that I relate it back to the resolution by talking about it being the goal of the American government, and that is why it is a good value to have in today's debate. So moving on to the value criterion, I support it with human rights, and I relate human rights back to my value by saying, well, we cannot have quality of life without providing for a person's basic needs. So that is how you relate your value criterion back to your value. So past a bunch of miscellaneous framework stuff like observations and definitions, we go down to our contentions. The first one here being health, showing how cutting off fossil fuel production would be a net positive for people's health and access to necessary resources. I give a bunch of sources here that outline the harms that are happening in the negation world, and then I say here that the affirmation side of the debate is solving for them. Now, one thing that 2023 Andrew didn't account for was that he should be giving a source on how the affirmation is solving for the problems presented within the contention. The only thing I do here to talk about that is this little sentence. But most importantly, I go to the end of the contention and I say, thus the negation violates my value criterion of human rights, as people across the nation are being denied their right to clean water, breathable air, which is in turn infringing on their right to life. Basically, this entire section is bringing the contention around, showing this whole thing matters because it connects to this value up here. And I do this with every single other one of our contentions. Furthermore, we can also see that all of these contentions follow that same kind of structure. We show the problem. We give sources showing that, yes, the problem's real. Things are like we're spending more than $12 trillion. And then you say, well, you solve for that problem in your side of the debate, and then you relate it to the back to your value. This is the basic structure that you should be using for almost all of your contentions within a Lincoln Douglas debate. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please speak to your teachers, coaches, captains, Whoever's teaching you this stuff, go ask them questions, and I wish you all luck in your future debate endeavors.